The wind screamed through the empty streets like a wounded animal, carrying walls of white so thick that the headlights of the black Mercedes barely cut through 5 feet ahead. Daniel Foster gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning pale, cursing himself for staying at the office so late on a night when every weather report had warned of the worst blizzard in 15 years. The dashboard clock read 11:47. The temperature outside had dropped to -12. And somewhere between the financial district and his penthouse apartment, the city had become a frozen nightmare. He should have listened. He should have left hours ago when his assistant had begged him to go home early. But deals don't close themselves, and Daniel Foster hadn't built a $2 billion empire by running from storms. He had built it by walking straight through them. Yet, as his windshield wipers fought desperately against the relentless snow, even he had to admit that this particular storm might be winning. That's when he saw them. At first, he thought his eyes were playing tricks on him, a shadow against the white chaos, a shape that didn't belong in this frozen wasteland. But as his car crawled closer, the shape became clearer, and what Daniel saw made his heart stop beating for a full 3 seconds. A young woman stood at the edge of the road, clutching 2 small children against her body. One child was wrapped in her arms, the other pressed against her leg. They weren't moving toward shelter, they weren't waving for help. They were simply standing there, frozen in place, as if the blizzard had already claimed them, and they were just waiting for the end to come. Daniel's foot hit the brake before his mind could form a conscious thought. The Mercedes skidded slightly on the ice before coming to a stop. For a moment, he just stared through the windshield, watching the woman's dark hair whip violently in the wind, watching the children huddle closer to her thin frame. She wore no winter coat. The children had blankets wrapped around them, but even from inside his heated car, Daniel could see those blankets were soaked through with snow and completely useless against this kind of cold. Every instinct told him to keep driving. This wasn't his problem. This wasn't his responsibility. He had worked too hard, sacrificed too much, to risk his life for strangers in a blizzard. But something deeper than instinct, something he had buried years ago beneath boardroom battles and billion-dollar decisions, wouldn't let him press the gas pedal. He opened his door and stepped into the storm. The cold hit him like a physical assault, stealing his breath and burning his exposed skin. He pulled his coat tighter and pushed forward through the knee-deep snow. Each step felt like walking through wet concrete. Each breath felt like inhaling broken glass. But he kept moving until he reached the woman and her children. Up close, she looked even younger than he had expected, maybe 25, maybe less. Her face was pale, her lips had turned a dangerous shade of blue, and her eyes held a desperation so raw that Daniel felt it pierce through him like a blade. "Come with me," he shouted over the howling wind. "My car is right there. I'll get you somewhere safe." The woman didn't move. She stared at him with those desperate eyes. And Daniel saw something else in them now. Fear. Not fear of the storm, but fear of him. Fear of trusting a stranger. Fear of hoping when hope had failed her too many times before. "Please," Daniel tried again. "Your children, they'll freeze. We all will if we stay out here." The little girl pressed against the woman's leg looked up at Daniel. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with round cheeks that should have been rosy, but were instead ghostly white. Her lips trembled as she spoke, and her voice was so small that Daniel almost missed it beneath the roar of the wind. "Mommy," she whispered, "I'm so cold." Something in the woman's expression shattered. Whatever walls she had built, whatever fears had paralyzed her, crumbled in an instant when she heard her daughter's voice. She nodded once, quickly, and allowed Daniel to guide them toward his waiting car. Getting them inside felt like it took forever. The smaller child, a boy no older than 3, had stopped shivering entirely, which Daniel knew was a very bad sign. The woman climbed into the back seat with both children, pulling them onto her lap, trying to share whatever body heat she had left. Daniel cranked the heater to maximum and pulled off his own coat, draping it over the three of them. "There's a hospital about 2 miles from here," he said, already pulling the car back onto the road. "We need to get your son checked. He's too quiet." "He'll be fine," the woman said quickly. "We just need somewhere warm. Anywhere warm. Then we'll be out of your way." "You're not in my way." Daniel glanced at her through the rearview mirror. "What were you doing out there? Where's your car?" The woman didn't answer immediately. She focused on rubbing her son's small hands between her own, trying to bring warmth back into his frozen fingers. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "We don't have a car. We were walking. There was supposed to be a shelter on Maple Street, but it was full. They said there was another one across town, but—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "We didn't make it." Daniel's grip tightened on the steering wheel. Walking. In this storm. With 2 young children. The nearest shelter across town was at least 4 miles away. Even in good weather, that would have been a difficult walk with kids. In a blizzard like this, it was a death sentence. "How long were you out there?" "I don't know. An hour, maybe more." An hour. Daniel felt a cold sensation spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the weather outside. They had been standing in negative 12-degree temperatures, with wind chills pushing it even lower, for over an hour. The fact that they were still conscious was nothing short of a miracle. The hospital appeared through the wall of white like a beacon of hope. Daniel pulled up to the emergency entrance and helped the woman carry her children inside. The warm air that hit them was almost painful after the brutal cold. But Daniel had never been more grateful for anything in his life. The emergency room was chaotic, filled with other victims of the storm, frostbite cases, car accident injuries, elderly patients who had lost power in their homes. Nurses and doctors rushed between beds with the focused intensity of soldiers in battle. When Daniel approached the intake desk with the woman and her children, he was told the wait would be at least 3 hours. "These children were exposed to severe cold for over an hour," Daniel said, his voice carrying the authoritative edge that had made him feared in boardrooms across the country. "The boy has stopped shivering. That means his body temperature is dangerously low. They need attention now." The nurse looked up from her computer screen, ready to deliver a standard response about waiting like everyone else. But then she saw Daniel's face, really saw it, and something in her expression shifted. Maybe she recognized him from the business magazines. Maybe she simply recognized a man who would not accept no for an answer. Either way, she picked up her phone and made a call. Within minutes, a doctor appeared and led them to a private examination room. Daniel stayed in the waiting area while the woman and her children were checked, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers to. Who was she? Where had she come from? Why was she walking through a blizzard with 2 young children in the middle of the night? He told himself it didn't matter. He had done his good deed for the decade. Once the doctors confirmed the children were stable, he could leave. He could go home to his warm penthouse, pour himself a whiskey, and forget this entire night had ever happened. But even as he thought it, he knew he was lying to himself. There was something about this woman, something about the way she had looked at him with those desperate eyes, that he couldn't shake from his mind. It felt like recognition, though he was certain he had never seen her before in his life. An hour passed, then another. Daniel sat in the uncomfortable waiting room chair, watching the chaos of the emergency room swirl around him. He answered emails on his phone. He reviewed reports. He did everything he could to pretend he was still the same man he had been when he left his office tonight. A man who didn't get involved, who didn't let strangers into his carefully controlled world. Then the doctor appeared and walked toward him. "Mr. Foster," Daniel looked up. "How are they?" "The children are going to be fine. We've brought their body temperatures back up. The boy gave us a scare, but he's recovered well. They're strong kids." The doctor paused, choosing his next words carefully. "The mother, however, is another matter." Daniel's stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "She's severely malnourished, dehydrated. showing signs of exhaustion that suggest she hasn't slept properly in days, maybe weeks. Whatever brought her to the point of walking through a blizzard with her children, it wasn't a sudden decision. This woman has been struggling for a long time. Daniel absorbed this information in silence. He thought about the way she had refused his coat at first, choosing to freeze rather than accept help from a stranger. He thought about the fear in her eyes, the kind of fear that came from being hurt too many times. "Can I see them?" The doctor nodded and led him down a corridor to a small room where the woman sat on a bed with her 2 children asleep beside her. The little girl had one arm wrapped around her brother as if protecting him even in her dreams. The woman looked up when Daniel entered, and for the first time he saw her clearly without the blur of the blizzard. She was beautiful in a haunted way, dark hair that fell past her shoulders, eyes that held depths of sorrow and strength in equal measure, a face that looked like it had once known how to smile, but had forgotten somewhere along the way. "The doctor says your kids are going to be okay," Daniel said, keeping his voice low to avoid waking them. "Thank you." She spoke the words carefully, as if they were foreign objects on her tongue. "For everything. For stopping. You didn't have to stop." "Of course I had to stop. Anyone would have." She shook her head slowly. "No, they wouldn't have. I know, because many people drove past us before you came. I watched their headlights. I watched them slow down, and then I watched them keep going." Daniel didn't know how to respond to that. He had always believed that most people were decent, that when it truly mattered, humanity would show its better nature. But he also knew, from his years in business, that belief and reality were often very different things. "What's your name?" "Emma Sullivan." "I'm Daniel Foster." Her eyes widened slightly at the name, and Daniel saw that flicker of recognition he had noticed earlier. She knew who he was. Most people did. His face had been on the cover of Forbes twice. His company had been featured in every major business publication in the country. He was the self-made billionaire, the orphan who built an empire from nothing, the American dream personified. "I know who you are," Emma said quietly. "Everyone knows who you are. Does that change anything?" "I don't know. Does it?" It was a strange question, and Daniel found himself without an answer. In his world, who he was changed everything. It opened doors and closed them. It attracted some people and repelled others. But sitting in this hospital room, looking at this woman and her sleeping children, he wasn't sure any of that mattered. "The doctor says you need rest," he said instead. "Real rest. And food. He says you've been running on empty for too long." Emma's jaw tightened. "The doctor doesn't know anything about my life." "Then tell me how you ended up walking through a blizzard tonight." For a long moment Emma said nothing. She looked at her sleeping children, her hand moving to gently stroke her daughter's hair. When she finally spoke, her voice was hollow, as if she was reciting facts about someone else's life. 6 months ago my husband died. Car accident. He was coming home from work, same route he took every day, and a truck ran a red light. He never saw it coming." She paused, swallowing hard. "After that, everything fell apart. The bills, the rent. His life insurance took months to process, and when it finally came through, it was barely enough to cover his funeral costs. I tried to work, but daycare costs more than I could earn. I tried to get help from family, but I don't have any family left, so we fell behind on rent. Then we fell behind on everything else. And last week our landlord changed the locks while we were at the grocery store. All our things, everything we owned, just gone." Daniel felt something twist inside his chest. He had heard stories like this before. He had even donated to charities that claimed to help people in exactly this situation. But hearing it directly, seeing the reality of it sitting in front of him, was entirely different. What about shelters, social services? Shelters are full, always full, especially in winter. Social services have waiting lists that stretch for months. I've been bouncing between temporary options for a week, but tonight, she shook her head. Tonight there was nowhere left to go. The shelter on Maple Street was our last hope, and when they turned us away, I panicked. I thought, if we could just make it across town, if we could just reach the other shelter before the storm got too bad. But the storm came faster than I expected, and suddenly we were trapped. So you just stood there, in the middle of the blizzard? I couldn't move forward. I couldn't see where I was going, and I couldn't go back because there was nothing to go back to. So yes, I stood there. I held my children as tight as I could, and I prayed that someone would stop, that someone would care enough to save us. Her eyes met his, and for the first time Daniel saw tears forming in their corners. And someone did. You did. Daniel opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. What could he possibly say? That he was sorry? That everything would be okay? Those were empty words, the kind of meaningless platitudes that people offered when they had nothing real to give. Instead, he said something that surprised even himself. "Come with me." Emma blinked. "What?" "When the doctors release you, come with me. I have a house, a big house, with more empty rooms than I know what to do with. You and your children can stay there until you get back on your feet. No strings attached. Just a safe place to sleep and eat and figure out your next steps." Emma stared at him as if he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." "You're right. I don't know you. But I know what it's like to have nothing. I know what it's like to be hungry and cold and afraid. And I know that when I was in that place, someone helped me. Someone who didn't have to. Someone who had no reason to care about a worthless kid with no future. They helped me anyway. And that's the only reason I'm standing here today." The words came out before Daniel could stop them, and he felt exposed in a way he hadn't felt in years. He never talked about his past. He had spent decades building walls around those memories, keeping them locked away where they couldn't hurt him. But something about this woman, something about this night, had cracked those walls open. Emma was silent for a long time. She looked at her children again, her face torn between hope and suspicion. Daniel understood both emotions. Hope was dangerous when you had been hurt too many times. Suspicion was necessary when the world had taught you that nothing came for free. "I don't take charity," she finally said. "I've never taken charity in my life." "Then don't call it charity. Call it a loan. Call it a favor you'll pay forward someday. Call it whatever you need to call it to accept help tonight." Another long pause. Then, so quietly that Daniel almost missed it, Emma whispered a single word. "Okay." The Foster estate sat on 12 acres of land just outside the city, a sprawling mansion that Daniel had purchased 5 years ago and barely used since. He had bought it because it was expected of someone in his position, because business partners and investors responded well to displays of wealth and success. But the truth was that Daniel spent most of his nights in his office or in hotels near whatever deal he was closing. The house was more museum than home. When Daniel pulled into the circular driveway that night, the storm had finally begun to ease. The wind had died down, and the snow fell in gentle waves rather than violent sheets. Emma sat in the back seat with her children, who had woken briefly at the hospital before falling back asleep in the warm car. She stared out the window at the massive house, her expression unreadable. "This is where you live." "This is where I sleep sometimes," Daniel corrected. "Living requires more presence than I've given this place." He parked near the front entrance and helped Emma carry her children inside. The house was cold, having sat empty for weeks, but Daniel quickly adjusted the thermostat while Emma looked around with wide eyes. The foyer alone was larger than most apartments. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings. Marble floors stretched toward a grand staircase that curved up toward the second floor. "I'll show you to a guest suite," Daniel said, leading the way. "There are actually several, but the one in the east wing is the warmest. It has its own bathroom and a sitting room attached. The kids can have their own beds or share, whatever works best." Emma followed him in silence, carrying her son while her daughter walked beside her, still half asleep, and holding on to her mother's hand. When they reached the guest suite, Emma stopped in the doorway and didn't move for a full minute. The room was decorated in soft blues and whites, with a king-sized bed against one wall and two smaller beds near the window. A fireplace crackled in the corner, already lit by the house's automated systems. Fresh flowers sat on the nightstand, replaced weekly by the household staff, even when no one was there to see them. "This is bigger than our entire apartment was," Emma whispered. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. He had never been good at dealing with wealth disparity face to face. It was easy to be rich when you surrounded yourself with other rich people, when you forgot that most of the world lived very differently. There are clean clothes in the closet. The staff keeps them stocked for guests. They might not fit perfectly, but they'll be warmer than what you're wearing. The kitchen is downstairs if you're hungry, and if you need anything during the night, anything at all, there's an intercom by the bed that connects to my room. Emma turned to look at him, and Daniel saw the exhaustion in her face more clearly now that they were in proper lighting. Dark circles ringed her eyes. Her cheekbones were too prominent, evidence of meals she had skipped to feed her children. She looked like a woman who had been fighting a war for months without rest. "Thank you," she said. "I keep saying it, but I don't know what else to say. Thank you." "Get some sleep. We can figure everything else out in the morning." Daniel turned to leave, but Emma's voice stopped him at the door. "Mr. Foster." "Daniel, please." "Daniel." She hesitated, then continued. "Why did you really stop tonight? On that road, in that storm, there must have been dozens of cars that passed us. Why were you the one who stopped?" It was a question Daniel had been asking himself since the moment he opened his car door. He could have given her a simple answer. He could have said it was basic human decency, or that he couldn't have lived with himself if he had driven by. But something about the night, something about the way Emma looked at him, demanded a deeper truth. 15 years ago, he said slowly, I was standing on a bridge in the middle of winter. I had just lost the only person who ever cared about me. I had no money, no job, no hope. I was ready to end everything. Emma's breath caught. She pulled her children closer instinctively, as if hearing this truth might somehow hurt them. "A woman found me there," Daniel continued, "a stranger. She was walking home from her night shift at a diner, and she saw me standing on the edge. She didn't know me. She had no reason to care. But she stopped anyway. She talked to me for 3 hours in the freezing cold. She bought me breakfast afterward. She helped me find a job at the company where she worked, a small tech firm that eventually became the foundation of everything I've built since." "What happened to her?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. "She passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. I found out too late to even say goodbye. I had been so busy building my empire that I forgot to stay in touch with the woman who gave me the chance to build it. I'm sorry. So am I, every day." Daniel met Emma's eyes. "I stopped tonight because I saw myself on that road. Not you specifically, but what you represented. A moment when everything hangs in the balance. A chance to be the person someone needs, even if you don't know them, even if it costs you something. I couldn't drive past that chance. Not after what someone once did for me." Emma said nothing, but her eyes glistened with tears she was too proud to let fall. Daniel nodded once and stepped out of the room, closing the door softly behind him. He walked to his own bedroom at the other end of the hall, but he didn't sleep. Instead, he stood at his window and watched the snow continue to fall over his estate, blanketing everything in white, covering the world in silence. His mind kept returning to Emma's face, to the desperation and strength he had seen warring behind her eyes. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know how long she would stay or what would happen when she left. But for the first time in years, Daniel Foster felt something other than the cold emptiness that had defined his existence. He felt purpose. Morning arrived gray and bright, the sun reflecting off the fresh snow with blinding intensity. Daniel woke after only a few hours of sleep, but he felt more alert than he had in months. He showered, dressed in casual clothes that felt foreign after years of suits and ties, and made his way downstairs to the kitchen. He found Emma already there, standing at the counter with her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee. She was wearing clothes from the guest closet, a simple sweater and jeans that fit loosely on her thin frame. Her hair was still damp from a shower, and without the harsh lights of the hospital or the chaos of the blizzard, Daniel could see her more clearly than before. She was beautiful, not in the polished, artificial way of the women who usually populated his world, but in a real, lived-in way that spoke of resilience and survival. Her beauty was in the strength of her jaw, the determination in her eyes, the way she held herself even when the world had tried to break her. "You're up early," he said, announcing his presence. Emma turned, startled. "I'm sorry, I couldn't sleep. I didn't mean to help myself to your coffee." "It's not my coffee, it's just coffee, and it's here to be drunk." A small smile flickered across Emma's face before disappearing again. "Your house is incredible. I spent an hour just walking through it this morning. I hope that's okay." "Of course. It's more walking than I've done in this house in months." They stood in awkward silence for a moment, two strangers thrown together by circumstance, neither quite sure how to navigate the strange intimacy of their situation. It was Emma who spoke first. "The kids are still sleeping. First time they've slept through the night in weeks. I think they feel safe here." "Good. That's what matters." "Daniel, I need to be honest with you about something." He waited, watching her gather her thoughts. "I recognized your name last night, not just from magazines or TV. I recognized it because my husband used to talk about you all the time." Daniel's brow furrowed. "Your husband knew me?" "He worked for you. For your company, I mean. 3 years ago, he was a junior developer at Foster Technologies. He was so excited when he got the job. He said it was the opportunity of a lifetime, working for a company that was changing the world." Emma paused, her grip tightening on the coffee mug. "Then there were layoffs, budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, just business." Daniel felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. He remembered those layoffs. Every CEO remembered the cuts they ordered, even if they didn't remember the individual names attached to them. 237 positions eliminated in a single quarter, all in the name of restructuring and efficiency. "My husband never recovered," Emma continued. "Not mentally. The rejection destroyed his confidence. He applied for hundreds of jobs, but couldn't get past the interviews. He started doubting himself, doubting everything. The accident that killed him, I've always wondered if it really was an accident, if maybe he wasn't paying attention because he had stopped caring whether he lived or died." "Emma, I'm not telling you this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you because I need you to understand something. When you stopped your car last night, when you offered to help us, I almost said no, because in my mind you were part of the system that destroyed my family. You were the man whose signature appeared on the letter that took away my husband's dream." Daniel stood frozen, unable to speak. He had always known in an abstract way that his decisions affected people's lives, but he had never stood face to face with the consequences. He had never seen what his efficiency reports and cost-cutting measures looked like when they were translated into human suffering. "But then I looked at my children," Emma said, her voice softening, "and I realized that holding on to that anger wouldn't keep them warm. It wouldn't put food in their stomachs. It wouldn't save their lives in a blizzard. So I put it aside. I chose to see you as the man who stopped when no one else would, not as the man whose decisions hurt my family. I'm sorry." The words felt inadequate, but Daniel didn't know what else to say. "I'm sorry for what happened to your husband. I'm sorry for my part in it. I never thought about the names behind the numbers. I should have." Emma set down her coffee mug and looked at him directly. "I didn't tell you this to get an apology. I told you because I want us to start from a place of truth. If I'm going to accept your help, if my children are going to live under your roof, I need to know that we're not pretending. I need to know that you see me as a person, not as a project or a charity case." "I see you," Daniel said quietly. "I saw you last night on that road, and I see you now. And I promise you, whatever help I give, it's not about easing my guilt or making myself feel better. It's about doing what's right, what I should have been doing all along. Something shifted in Emma's expression, a softening around the edges that suggested she might be starting to believe him. Before either of them could say more, the sound of small footsteps echoed from the hallway, and moments later, Emma's daughter appeared in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing pajamas from the guest room, too big for her small frame, with the sleeves rolled up several times. Her hair stuck out in wild directions, and her eyes were still heavy with sleep. But when she saw Daniel, she smiled, a genuine smile that transformed her entire face. "Good morning," she said. "Is it still snowing?" "Not anymore," Daniel answered, "but there's plenty of snow on the ground, enough to build a snowman if you want." The girl's eyes widened. "Really? Mommy, can we build a snowman?" Emma looked at Daniel, something complicated passing through her expression. "We'll see, sweetheart. First, let's have some breakfast." The next few hours passed in a blur of domesticity that Daniel hadn't experienced since childhood. Emma made pancakes while her daughter, whose name he learned was Lily, chattered endlessly about everything from her favorite cartoon characters to the dream she had last night. Her brother, a quiet boy named Noah, eventually woke up and joined them, speaking in soft words that Daniel had to lean close to hear. It was strange, this sudden invasion of noise and life into his silent world. Daniel's house had always been empty, a monument to success that no one was ever around to appreciate. Now it was filled with the sound of children's laughter, with the smell of cooking food, with the warmth of people who were actually present. And Daniel found, to his surprise, that he didn't hate it. Days turned into weeks. What had begun as temporary shelter slowly transformed into something more permanent. Daniel told himself it was practical, that Emma needed time to find a job and get back on her feet, that the children needed stability after everything they had been through. But deep down, he knew the truth was more complicated. He liked having them there. He liked coming home to a house that wasn't empty. He liked the way Lily would run to the door to greet him, shouting about whatever adventure she had imagined that day. He liked the way Noah, who had been so quiet at first, gradually began to open up, showing Daniel his drawings and asking for help with puzzles. He even liked the way Emma challenged him, refusing to let him retreat into the cold businessmen she had first encountered. "You work too much," she told him one evening as he sat in his home office, reviewing contracts long after the sun had set. "When was the last time you did something just for fun? Work is fun for me." That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. Building companies is challenging and rewarding. How is that sad? Because you're not building companies right now. You're reading contracts. There's a difference between creating something and maintaining it, and maintenance isn't supposed to consume your entire life. Daniel looked up from his laptop, ready to argue, but the words died on his lips when he saw Emma standing in the doorway. She had changed in the weeks since he had found her in the blizzard. The hollows beneath her eyes had filled in. Her cheeks had regained their color. She looked healthy now, alive in a way she hadn't been before. "What would you suggest instead?" he asked. "Come watch a movie with us. The kids picked out something animated. It has singing animals, which I know isn't exactly your style, but I promise you won't die from exposure to joy." Daniel closed his laptop. "You're very persuasive for someone who claims to be a guest in my house." "I've been here 6 weeks. I think we're past the guest phase." She was right. They were past the guest phase. They were past a lot of phases, actually, though neither of them had named what they were moving toward. Daniel joined her in the living room, where Lily and Noah had already arranged a fortress of pillows and blankets on the floor. The movie was terrible, exactly as advertised, but Daniel found himself laughing anyway, caught up in Lily's enthusiasm and Noah's rare smiles. When the credits rolled and Emma carried the sleeping children to their beds, Daniel stayed on the couch, staring at the blank television screen. He felt something he hadn't felt in longer than he could remember. He felt at home. Emma returned a few minutes later and sat beside him, closer than she usually did. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence was comfortable now, nothing like the awkward tension of their first days together. "I found a job," Emma said finally. Daniel looked at her. "What?" "A marketing position at a company downtown. It's entry-level, nothing special, but it pays well enough. I start next week." He should have been happy for her. He should have congratulated her on taking a step toward independence. Instead, he felt a strange hollowness spreading through his chest. "That's great," he managed. "That's really great. It means we can start looking for our own place soon. I've been saving everything I would have spent on rent while we've been here, so I have enough for a deposit on an apartment. Nothing fancy, but something safe and clean. You don't have to leave." The words came out before Daniel could stop them, and he watched Emma's expression shift as she processed what he had said. "Daniel, I know how that sounds. I know we've only known each other for a few weeks, but this house has been more alive since you arrived than it's ever been. You and Lily and Noah, you've made it a home, and I don't want to go back to the way things were before." Emma was quiet for a long time. Daniel watched emotions flicker across her face, hope and fear and uncertainty battling for dominance. When she finally spoke, her voice was careful, measured. "I've spent the last 6 weeks trying to keep my walls up, trying to remember that this isn't real, that it's temporary, that eventually I would have to go back to the real world and face things on my own. But every day you make it harder. You make it harder to stay guarded when you're teaching Noah to play chess. You make it harder to stay distant when you're helping Lily with her homework. You make it harder to remember that I'm supposed to be doing this alone. You're not supposed to be doing anything alone. That's not a rule. That's just something you've convinced yourself of because life has hurt you too many times." "And what about you?" Emma turned to face him fully. "What about your walls? What about the way you hide behind work and money and this big empty house? You're no different than me, Daniel. You're just better at pretending you chose to be alone." She was right. Daniel knew she was right. He had built his empire on isolation, convincing himself that connections were weaknesses and relationships were distractions. But the truth was that he had been hiding from the possibility of loss. If you never let anyone in, you never had to feel the pain of losing them. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he said quietly. "I don't want to go back to being the person I was before that night. Before you." Emma reached out and took his hand. Her fingers were warm against his, and Daniel felt something inside him break open, something he had kept locked away for far too long. "I'm scared," she admitted. "I'm scared of needing someone again, of building a life with someone and having it all taken away. I'm scared too, but I'm more scared of the alternative. I'm more scared of spending the rest of my life wondering what could have been." "Maoist." They sat together in the quiet house, hands intertwined, watching the snow fall past the windows. Neither of them knew what the future held. Neither of them could promise that everything would be easy or that no one would get hurt. But they had found each other in a blizzard, two broken people clinging to the wreckage of their former lives, and somehow they had built something new, and maybe that was enough. Spring came slowly that year, melting the snow inch by inch and coaxing the world back to life. By the time the first flowers bloomed in Daniel's garden, everything had changed. Emma had started her job but had never moved into an apartment. Instead, she and the children had stayed, their presence becoming as natural as the furniture, as essential as the air. Daniel found himself changing, too, in ways he never expected. He delegated more at work, trusting his team to handle things he once insisted on controlling. He came home earlier, eager to hear about Lily's day at school and Noah's latest discoveries. He learned to cook, badly at first, but with improving skill as Emma patiently guided him through recipes that had been in her family for generations. The media noticed the change. Business reporters who had once praised Daniel's ruthless focus now speculated about his softening, about the mysterious woman who had appeared in his life. Some painted it as a scandal, a billionaire taking advantage of a desperate widow. Others romanticized it, calling it a modern fairy tale. Daniel ignored all of it, choosing to focus on the reality rather than the stories people told about it. One evening in late spring, when the sun stayed in the sky long past dinner and the air was warm enough to sit outside without jackets, Daniel took Emma for a walk through the garden. The flowers were in full bloom, filling the air with sweetness, and the last light of day painted everything in gold and amber. "I've been thinking," Daniel said, as they walked hand in hand down a path lined with roses, "about the future, about what I want my life to look like." "And what do you want?" Emma asked. "I want this. I want you and Lily and Noah. I want dinner together and messy weekends and arguments about whose turn it is to wash the dishes. I want to build something that isn't measured in quarterly reports and stock prices. I want to build a family." Emma stopped walking and turned to face him. The setting sun caught her hair, turning it to copper and bronze, and Daniel thought he had never seen anyone more beautiful. "Are you asking what I think you're asking?" Daniel reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple but elegant, chosen not for its price but for the way it reminded him of Emma, strong and beautiful and full of light. "I know this is fast. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is crazy, but I also know that I've spent my entire life being cautious, being careful, being afraid to want things. And I don't want to be that person anymore. I want to be someone who takes chances, who believes in possibility, who isn't afraid to fight for what matters." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling now, really smiling, in a way Daniel had rarely seen. She reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the lines of his jaw, the corners of his eyes, the edges of his mouth. "You've already fought for what matters," she said softly. "You stopped on a frozen road in the middle of a blizzard. You opened your home to strangers. You let yourself care about people who might leave, who might hurt you, who might disappoint you. That's not someone who's afraid. That's someone who's brave. So is that a yes?" Emma laughed, a sound like bells ringing across the garden. "It's a yes. It's 1,000 times yes." Daniel slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling slightly with emotions he couldn't name. Then he pulled her close and kissed her as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The wedding was small, held in the garden on a summer day when the sky was impossibly blue and the flowers bloomed in every color imaginable. Lily served as the flower girl, scattering petals with enthusiastic abandon, while Noah carried the rings on a pillow, his small face serious with the weight of responsibility. Emma wore a simple white dress that flowed around her like water, and when Daniel saw her walking toward him down the makeshift aisle, he felt tears prick at the corners of his eyes. This was real. This was happening. After a lifetime of isolation and fear, he had finally found his way home. The ceremony was brief but beautiful, filled with words about love and partnership and the courage to start again. When Daniel said, "I do," his voice cracked with emotion he no longer tried to hide. When Emma said, "I do," her smile could have lit up the entire world. Afterward, they danced in the garden as the sun set and the stars came out. Lily twirled in circles until she collapsed into a pile of giggles. Noah fell asleep in a chair, exhausted from the excitement, and Daniel and Emma held each other close, swaying to music only they could hear. "Thank you," Emma whispered against his chest, "for stopping that night, for seeing me when I felt invisible, for giving us a chance." "Thank you for letting me," Daniel replied, "for trusting me when you had every reason not to, for teaching me what really matters." They stayed in the garden until long past midnight, watching the stars wheel overhead, feeling the warmth of summer air on their skin. The world felt full of possibility, of hope, of all the things Daniel had convinced himself he didn't need. But he did need them. He needed them desperately, and now, finally, he had them. Years passed, each one fuller than the last. The house that had once been empty now overflowed with life. Lily grew into a teenager, then a young woman, her spirit undiminished by the hardships of her early years. Noah emerged from his shell, revealing a brilliant mind and a gentle heart that reminded Daniel of his mother in ways that made his chest ache with memory and gratitude. Emma started her own marketing firm, building it from nothing into something impressive with the same determination that had kept her and her children alive during the darkest days. Daniel stepped back from his company, appointing younger leaders to carry it forward while he focused on philanthropy and family. He established foundations to help single parents in crisis, to provide emergency shelter during winter storms, to ensure that no one would ever have to stand on a frozen road wondering if anyone cared enough to stop. And every year, on the anniversary of the blizzard that had brought them together, Daniel and Emma would sit in their garden after the children went to bed and remember. They would remember the cold and the fear and the desperation. They would remember the moment when Daniel opened his car door and stepped into the storm. They would remember the choice that had changed everything. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you had kept driving?" Emma asked one year, when the snow was falling gently and the world was wrapped in white. "No," Daniel answered honestly, "because I couldn't have kept driving, not really. Something in me wouldn't let me." "What do you think it was?" Daniel thought about the question, turning it over in his mind like a stone in his palm. He thought about the woman who had saved him on that bridge 15 years ago. He thought about his mother, who had taught him compassion even when they had nothing. He thought about all the invisible threads that connected people, that drew them together in moments when everything hung in the balance. "I think it was love," he said finally. "Not romantic love, not yet. But the kind of love that recognizes something in another person and refuses to turn away. The kind of love that says, 'You matter,' even when you don't know someone's name." Emma leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the snow fall past the windows. "That's beautiful. It's the truth. And it's what I want to pass on to Lily and Noah. The understanding that we're all connected, that we all have the power to save each other, if we're brave enough to try." They sat together in the warm house as the storm swirled outside, grateful for the chance they had been given, determined to honor it with every day they had left. And somewhere in the city, on a frozen road, in the middle of a blizzard, another car slowed down, another door opened, and another hand reached out to help. Because that's what love does. It stops. It sees. It says, "Come with me," and it changes everything.